All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the STEM Career Talk series at Berkeley Lab. If you missed them, remember to check out our previous career talks to get insights from industry professionals. Today is going to be an extra exciting session because, as you may have noticed, Myra and I are going to be hosting. Myra.
So for those of you who don't know, we're interns with the Experiences in Research program at Berkeley Lab. Behind the scenes, we've been basically shadowing Faith and Jeremy just to learn the ropes about doing this kind of thing. So today is finally the day. And without further ado, I'd like to start introducing our panelists for today. So first, I'd like to welcome Dr. Micah Folsom, who is the Senior Scientific Engineering Associate in Applied Nuclear Physics at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. Micah has spent the last 10 years developing radiation sensors for nuclear security and safeguards applications that are used by law enforcement to search for smuggled nuclear materials. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Kanupriya Pandey, who is a bioinformaticist research scientist in molecular biophysics and integrated bioimaging. So welcome Micah and Kanupriya to the virtual stage.
Hi, everyone. I'm Micah Folsom. Can you hear me all right? Just double checking. All right. And so sorry if you see me waving my arm around, it's because my cat is running around and I'm trying to distract her from running up onto the desk and pressing keys. All right. So as Myra said, I'm a nuclear scientist. I work on radiation sensors for nuclear security and inspectors. And so basically those are tools for law enforcement officers or inspectors to look for nuclear material, someone trying to smuggle nuclear weapons material, or a country trying to make nuclear weapons when they shouldn't. And so I get to make little devices that detect that. So if you go to the next slide, a little bit about my journey. So I kind of always liked science and math and technical stuff. I like taking things apart and being on computers and playing video games. This is a picture of me in 8th grade, I think, playing an old game called Diablo 2 on my big monitor there, old computer. And so I was always really into like Discovery Channel and Science Channel and like sci-fi books, stuff like that. I started programming when I was about 10 so that I could make video games. And this was before like the newer programming languages like Python. I was doing kind of older, harder stuff, but it was a lot of fun. And so I grew up this way and knew I wanted to do something that I was building things or taking things apart or understanding how things worked in general. I'm still a big fan of games. I play Dungeons and Dragons. I play lots of board games with my friends. And I also make some games. And a friend of mine are working on a board game right now. So it's lots of fun. All right, go to the next one. So for my research, I will say briefly that along the way, I think this is particularly relevant to you as high schoolers. I did really well grades-wise in high school. I finished with like a 4.4 or something. In college and undergrad, I had a really hard time for a couple of years. I took a year off and I finished with like a 2.7. So I had a really hard time. And that did make it challenging to get into grad school, but it did make it impossible. And really all I had to do was prove that I could do good research to the people that I was working for, the faculty, in this case, at the University of Tennessee. And so I just wanted to mention that like everyone's going to take a different path, and mine was definitely a little bit longer or windier than some people's, but I'm really glad I did it the way that I did because it gave me the opportunity to learn a lot of different things and to make sure to take care of myself along the way so that I wasn't burning myself out and things like that. So after all those struggles, I come here, and so here's some pictures of my PhD work. On the left is the instrument that I created. So I designed it and I built it from scratch. I'm the only person in the world that's made one of these. And I'm still the world's expert on this kind of device. And so that's really exciting. I'm still, the only person who's done this, and that just feels really cool. It's something I'm really proud of. And again, this sort of device, the sensor is for detecting radiation and figuring out where it comes from. It's basically a camera, but for taking pictures of radiation. I think that's it. I don't think there's not another slide, right? I think that's it. But that's it, yeah. So we'll move on to the next person. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kanupriya Pandey. I'm a research scientist in molecular biophysics and integrated bioimaging. That's in the biosciences and the Center for Applied Mathematics for Energy Research Applications, CAMERA, and that's part of the computing division. So as you can see, my work is at the intersection of biology and computing. Next slide. All right, so I was born and brought up in India in a little city called, well, little by Indian standards, not US standards, called Lucknow. And that's close to the capital city, New Delhi. Similar to Micah, I had an interest in math and physics from the very beginning, and I knew that I wanted to have a career in science and tech. But I did not quite know what it was going to be. And that's when it helped, my undergraduate school at the Indian Institute of Technology in India actually helped me decide that I wanted to become a scientist. I worked in a materials chemistry lab as an undergraduate, and I was lucky to have a very good supervisor who got me really interested in doing research and materials discovery, and that's when I decided that I wanted to become a scientist. It's funny that pretty similar to Micah, I aced as a in school, but I sort of slacked off in undergraduate. And so I had a hard time also getting into graduate schools, but I finally ended up getting into grad school at the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee, and my PhD was in computational condensed matter physics. And after that, I did a postdoc at the Synchrotron Institute in Germany, and that's located in the city of Hamburg, which is pretty way up north in Germany. And after that, I was recruited as a project scientist at LBL, and I got promoted a couple of years ago to research scientist. So one of the cool things I like about being a scientist, as you can see, is I've had the privilege of living in 3 different continents and experiencing their culture, meeting different kinds of people, and learning a lot from people all over the world. So very briefly about my research. So we work in collaboration with DOE Light Sources to develop algorithms to interpret data that come from a variety of different experiments. So what does that mean? The Department of Energy funds a bunch of experimental facilities. One of them is right here at LBL called the Advanced Light Source. So users can go do very fun experiments at these facilities. A lot of the time they will propose experiments that result in very complicated data that is noisy, perhaps incomplete. And that's where we come in. We try to come up with computational techniques to deal with data that for which software already does not exist. Now, what are these experiments useful for? So one of them, for example, you can look at the electronic and geometric structure of battery materials that help you make rechargeable batteries. And so you don't need to use fossil fuels anymore. Or you can look at the structure of proteins like transporters and receptors in the presence of ligands, and that enables drug discovery. You could also combine different techniques to study the dynamics inside whole cells. And a very important aspect is to understand how, for example, photoactive proteins absorb light, convert it into energy, and let photosynthesis occur. And what this helps us is gives us ideas on how we can design artificial materials that will help in sustainable fuel production. And so I look forward to discussing this more later on in the panel discussion.
Thank you for those interesting introductions. I'd like to encourage our audience to add some questions in the chat box now, because we'll be moving to our Q&A section of the program soon. I'd like to now welcome the rest of our panel. Both of these speakers are fellows or have been fellows at Cyclotron Road, which is a prestigious entrepreneurship program at Berkeley Lab, and they'll tell you more about it. Dr. Aaron Hall is a fellow at Cyclotron Road. He founded and is currently the CEO of Entropic Materials, which is solving the plastic waste problem from the inside out. He'll tell you more about it in his introduction. And after Erin is going to be Dr. Jill Foos, who was a Cyclotron Road Fellow from 2018 to 2020. She was a postdoc and research scientist in molecular biophysics and integrated bioimagery, and is a co-founder of CinderBio, a spin-out company that uses extremophile microbes to produce industrial enzymes that can withstand very high temperatures and acidic environments. She is now the managing director of Activate Berkeley, the nonprofit that partners with Cyclotron Road to run the fellowship program. So now I'll pass it to Aaron to tell you a bit about his career path.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending. And I'm so excited that so many of you are interested in STEM, especially so early on in your careers. So I'm a California native. I was born in Berkeley. I grew up in Oakland. And unlike the previous panelists, I actually did not know I was going to be a scientist growing up. There's a great little video my parents have of me saying I wanted to be all sorts of things, like a knight and a firefighter and a cowboy and an astronaut. And I just loved everything and wanted to do everything. And I think I still kind of do, and that, I have to focus that in a little bit. But after I finished up, my early education, I went down to Santa Cruz, and that's where I really discovered my love for science. I was a chemistry major down there, and I got to do some really great chemistry research, cleaning up some reactions, so getting heavy metals out and using simpler reagents in order to make the molecules that we were interested in. I also worked in our dining hall, so I'm a big foodie. I love food, I love cooking. And I took those two experiences, so chemistry and food, and actually got a job after I graduated and at Del Monte Foods. And so I became a food scientist, which was a job that I didn't know actually existed until I happened to see a job posting about it. And I had a lot of fun. There's a picture of me in the middle there, holding a big block of butter that I found in the freezer. And so that was a lot of fun. I spent 3 years there and then wanted to go back to graduate school. So I went to Berkeley and I studied material science and engineering. So that's a photo of me and my PhD advisor, Professor Ting Xu, where we were working on the technology that ultimately now I'm commercializing at Entropic Materials at LBL and the Cyclotron Road program. Next slide, please. And so what we're working on is plastic waste. So I'm a polymer scientist, and plastics are made of polymers. And I think many of you may be aware that there's a really big plastic waste problem right now. So over 6.3 billion tons of plastic have ended up as waste, and they're in our environment, they're in landfills, they're in our ocean, and we're seeing increasingly they're probably in our bodies too via microplastics. And so I think we really need to address this problem and get ahead of it. Next slide, please. And so I believe that compostable plastic is going to be one key part of that solution. And on the top there, top left, you'll probably see some products that look kind of familiar, those green cups you get when you buy beverages out, or these compostable bags. And so it's exciting because there actually are products coming on the market in this. But unfortunately, the current plastics actually don't degrade all that fast, and you need some special infrastructure to get them to degrade. And so that's what we're working on, is addressing that problem so that hopefully we can get to something more like the right. And the way we do that is we try to make plastic self-destruct. So we take enzymes which lead we take enzymes which lead substrates to turn to products. So they break down bonds, and we put them directly inside the plastic so we can get really fast degradation on demand. And I like to say our plastics will self-destruct. So really excited for the Q&A. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. My name is Jill Foos, and yeah, I'll just go a little bit into my background and my journey in STEM. So I grew up outside of Chicago, and like Erin, I didn't expect to be a scientist. I actually, when I graduated from high school, if you'd asked me what I wanted to do with my life, I would have said anything but science. I thought I was going to go into international business and was going to go study economics. And I went to college at Wesleyan University in Connecticut, where I took economics and I hated it. And then I took a geology class my first year in college, and I really, really loved it. And then we drove around in a van and looked at road cuts and figured out how the rocks got there. And that was really fun to me. So I majored in environmental science for my undergrad, and for my junior year, I went to Australia for a semester abroad. And there I did a project where I looked at worms in the rainforest and also in land that had been deforested for agriculture, and used those worms as an indicator species for soil health. And I was out in the hot sun digging up worms, measuring them, and I hated it. So I thought, well, I can't do this for the rest of my life. And so, looked around what else I could do. And I had the opportunity to do a summer internship at the National Institutes of Health, where I was in a small lab in the main NIH building. The labs are tiny, tiny. And it was a hot DC summer, and I was in absolute heaven. I love doing bench science. So I was running gels and columns and that sort of thing. And I was so happy to be doing that work that I knew that this was what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And so I also did but it was too late at that point to change my major. And so I stayed as an environmental science major, but started taking classes to be able to go to graduate school in molecular biology. And so I applied to schools out on the West Coast and went to Berkeley for molecular and cell biology, where I studied DNA replication and DNA repair, the basic science behind that. I then went to Berkeley Lab for my postdoc, and then I stayed there as a research scientist, working on the structural biology of DNA repair enzymes. And so that involves work at the Advanced Life Source and a lot of the math that kind of Priya talked about. And from that work, I spun out a company with another scientist from the lab called Cinder Bio. And yes, we were in the cyclotron road program from 2018 to 2020. And that was really a life-changing experience for me. So just to tell you a little bit about Cinder Bio. So Cinder Bio makes extreme enzymes for industry. And if you go to the next slide, what does that mean? Sorry, could you go to the, there we go. So these are enzymes from volcanic hot springs. And so when you take enzymes from microbes that thrive in volcanic hot springs, they're heat and acid stable. And so they can replace harmful chemicals in many industrial processes. And they're a sustainable natural product, and they actually work better than chemicals in many areas. So they can save time in these processes. And so in 2021, I left Cinder Bio, and just this month, actually, I started as the managing director of Activate Berkeley, which, as was mentioned, is the nonprofit that partners with Berkeley Lab to run the Cyclotron Road Activate Fellowship. So what it is that we really empower scientists to reinvent the world by bringing their research to market. It's a 2-year fellowship that provides salary to scientists that might have a breakthrough discovery that they discovered during their PhD research or postdoc research, and then they take that 2 years to figure out if they can commercialize that technology, and really fills the gap between that basic science and commercial product. So the next slide. The fellowship really works. So the program started in 2015. We've supported 142 fellows and 106 science-based companies. So some of the fellows had co-founders, so that's why those numbers don't quite match up. And to date, we've reached almost $1 billion in follow-on funding for those companies, and over 700 new jobs have been created. So it's a program that really has an impact and helps bring these technologies to the world. And so on my next slide, since we're talking about science for the societal good, I just want to leave you with this. So the world needs scientists now more than ever. As you know, we have great global challenges, including climate change. And we need programs like this to help bring technology to the world. And we need all of you to join us in this effort. So I'm looking forward to the Q&A. Thanks, everybody.
All right, awesome. Thanks so much, everyone, for those intros. I'd like to continue by I'm going to continue with the Q&A, but I just like to remind the audience, I've seen a lot of good reactions coming in, so keep those coming in. If you guys have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or put them in the Q&A section. So my first question for everyone is basically why you guys chose what you do. So for Aaron and Joe, why did you choose to transition from lab research to startups? And for Micah and Kanupriya, why did you pursue lab research specifically? So we'll just answer in that order. So Aaron, Joe, Micah, and then Kanupriya.
Yeah, happy to do that. I think I chose entrepreneurship instead of lab research because I wanted to keep growing in a different way. I wanted to take my science skills that I had developed, but I wanted to use them in a new way. And I think looking back on my career, I've done that a lot of times. I took my interest in food and then turned it into food science career and then went to materials. And then now I'm trying to start a company. And I'm really excited about this idea of being able to use science, but to actually drive things in the world, in the market, and impact. And I think that to me was it was really exciting, that potential to bring all those things together in one place.
Yeah, for me, I think it really came down to impact with my science. So I was a basic scientist for over 20 years, and that was amazing experience. And I loved being at the frontier of discovery, you know, being the first person to you know, look at a gene, you know, from a particular organism, like the first person to ever look at that sequence or, you know, figure out what that thing did. And that was just an amazing experience. But I also felt like, you know, the output of that research was to publish papers. And the reality of it was that not a lot of people were reading my paper. You know, it was like a small group of scientists that were interested in what I was doing. And so I felt like I wanted to do something that would have, you know, immediate impact. You know, basic science, yes, it has an impact for sure, but it might take, you know, 20, 30 years to really fully be realized. And so I wanted to do something that would have a little bit of more immediate impact. And so that's why I turned to commercializing, you know, our technology, because, you know, then in, you know, 10 years, we could bring something to market and put it into people's hands, and they could be using it to do things in a better way, a more sustainable way. And so that's why I decided to move into startups.
Yeah, I think I'm next. For me, it's a big part of it was that the lab is really the only place that you can do the stuff that I'm doing. I mentioned that I made this radiation camera, and it's the only one of its kind that exists. Similarly, the group that I work for at the lab is the only group that does what they do. They're on the cutting edge of this technology, the portable radiation sensors that you can carry around. They'll build a 3D model of the space that you're in real time and then map the radiation onto it. And so it's no one else is doing this to the degree that we're doing it. And so it's really cool working on the front edge of the technology, being able to push it and think about like, well, where do we go next? How do we make it better? What other problems can we solve that will improve how this thing works? And so, yeah, that was a big driver for me.
All right, for me, first of all, as all the other panelists can vouch, Berkeley Lab is a great place to work at. So I've sort of gotten attached to being over here. On the question of lab versus industry, I just like the idea of having flexibility over the type of research I could do. So over here, I can actually get involved in a bunch of projects. So I'm able to learn new computational techniques and mathematics. And at the same time, I lead a couple projects of my own. So I treat them sort of as my own baby. I take care of it. And there's just, as much as we rely on DOE funding and we have to meet deadlines, the deadlines are a little bit gray over here as opposed to in the industry. And so it just gives you, I think it gives me a little more flexibility with, how I design my research and how I do it. And I don't have to constantly stress out about meeting a hard deadline. And then the other aspect for me, which I guess the other people don't have, is that I was here on a visa. And so what that means is that if I did not have a job, then I would get about 2 months before I would have find another job or leave the country. And so a lot of academic jobs are sort of career track or they're tenured. And so I was a bit risk averse to losing my job and having to go back to India. So I just that's why I'm here at the lab, and I love it.
Well, those are some awesome journeys. I wanted to ask each of you, from your research and your work so far, what do you think has had the largest impact? We can go maybe a different direction, maybe like Micah, Kanupriya, and then Jill and Aaron.
Yes, biggest impact. So I was part of this isn't even really necessarily building a little device or solving a major scientific problem, but I actually feel like one of the biggest impact events I participated in was I did a trip to Japan. It was paid for by the Japanese government. And I went to Fukushima, where the reactor melted down in 2011. It was sort of this exchange where obviously I'm a professional or an expert on radiation detectors and that technology. So they were bringing me to get some of my experience, but then they were also showing me the robots and the technology they were creating to decommission and clean up the reactor and the contamination. And to me, that was huge. Working with the students at the University of Tokyo, there were a bunch of things that I don't think I ever would have experienced otherwise. Where we really, I think, had an impact on each other and thinking about what types of problems we're solving and how we solve it.
For me, there was an experiment that I worked on, which was done at the free electron laser source at SLAC, which is close to Stanford University, and that was an experiment on something called the photoactive yellow protein, where what they wanted to see was how these proteins first get activated and do all of their jobs. And that was the first experiment which could look at the dynamics that happened at femtosecond level in 10 to the negative 12th of a 10 to the negative 9 12th of a second. That's how fast these reactions take place. And apart from the data analysis being challenging, I think the entire setup of the experiment was very challenging, and it was cool to see how everything just came together and worked. So different aspects of science and engineering coming together to give us some beautiful results. And I think that had an impact in getting other researchers to do more experiments of that kind.
My next. So yeah, it's a hard question to ask. There's a few things I'd like to talk about, but I think I'm going to say, like, the job that I have now, I think has got the potential to have the biggest impact. My job right now, I am the mentoring all the fellows, and taking all that I've learned, both my technical knowledge and also what I've learned starting a company, and amplifying those learnings by helping all of the fellows be successful. So people like Aaron, who are doing amazing work commercializing their discoveries, I think where I am right now is the most thrilling place I've been. So glad to be doing this job.
And I suppose that leaves me. I actually have two, I think, that really were important to me, and they're related. So it's the same sort of core technology, but what we worked on during my PhD, we had this idea that, but we should be bringing together polymers and biology. And so we developed this system that lets us take enzymes out of cells and put them inside of things like plastics and organic solvents, where we do chemistry. And it was a really weird project. It was hard because there was a little bit of reading about things kind of like this over here and a little bit over here, but nothing really to just follow directly as a guideline, which I think is kind of how PhDs often go. But we published it, and we got to publish it in a really prestigious journal, Science, and it was awesome. And what I think has been really cool and impactful is that there's now other researchers out there who are working on these kinds of systems and exploring them in new ways. And so that's always really exciting as a scientist to see others kind of picking up the threads and taking them in new ways and exploring. And then I think the work that we're doing now at the company and through LBL and Cyclotron Road is just obviously very, very exciting for me, because I think plastic waste is such a big problem, and in general, climate and more sustainable routes to making our chemicals and materials is really important. And so I'm hoping we can leave an impact on at least one of those areas, and hopefully many of them over time.
Awesome. Yeah, I think because the world's like, people want to be scientists, I think it's becoming more important for people to think about the impact that their work can have on general society. So kind of switching gears, I'd like to ask, what have been some of the most challenging aspects of your work? So like problems you had with projects or just your career path in general. So we'll start with Kanupriya this time, and then go to Kanupriya, Jill, Micah, and then Aaron.
So at the lab, I work in collaboration with a bunch of people who have different expertise. So there's beamline scientists, and there are biologists, and there are physicists I'm a physicist by training, and then there are applied mathematicians. And so the one challenge that I face sometimes is to be able to find a common language. Sometimes you have to pick up the language of the other people, do your reading about what it is they're doing. When they say use a certain word, what it is they mean. So that can be a bit challenging, and also you just have to learn to work in these bigger collaborations and make have a good team and be a good team player. Of course, there are challenges related to the technical aspects of work, which is it's challenging. At the same time, that's kind of what keeps you constantly busy and involved in the work. When you're not able to solve a problem, find a bug, you were just, you beat your head against the wall. Sometimes that gets challenging. It comes in the way of your personal life. But yeah, so those are the challenges that one has to think about and figure out how to have a balanced life.
Yeah, so I mean, science is full of challenges, and I think it's one of those things that it was really important for me to become comfortable with how to deal with those roadblocks along the way. And I feel like those were some of the moments of like biggest discovery. So I'm thinking of like, I had projects that did not work, like doing experiment after experiment, and they just didn't work. And so it caused me and the people I was working with to look for new solutions. And so like that's how I ended up working on microbes that live in volcanic hot springs, because we were looking for hyperstable proteins that would work in our experiments better. I had the privilege of working on a worm that lives at the bottom of the ocean on these black smoker chimneys, and that was really amazing. I had proteins that wouldn't express, and so I ended up developing an expression vector to make proteins in insect cells, to make these big protein complexes. And that system has been really useful to a lot of researchers all over the world. And so, that all came out of, having experiments that didn't work, searching for solutions to those problems. And it's really the joy and the fun of science. And of course, along the way, like, it didn't really feel that way in the moment, and just like, going home each day and being like, why is this not working? But really, that's the fun of it in many ways. All right, Mike, are you next?
I think so. I'll do two parts. As far as my actual research job, My job, I'm really more of like an engineer than your typical scientist. So I'm not actually writing grants. I'm not like proposing new scientific research. I'm a guy that you hire to do engineering work. And if you want to build something, you talk to me. And if you want to make something work, get all the code to get it to work, to run the algorithms and do stuff, I'm the person you talk to. So that means that I work on a lot of different things, 6 different projects. And that means that I do a lot of context switching and thinking about like, okay, I'm doing this one thing and writing this code here. And then in the same day, I'll go over here and be testing electronics and soldering wires. And like, it's just, you have to think about things very differently. And it does take a lot of energy. We don't really appreciate how much effort is required to switch between different things and think about things that are very different contexts. So that's definitely a challenge for me. Someone in the chat asked about the struggles along the way. And like I took this year off during undergrad, and how do you kind of keep yourself motivated, or how do you keep going despite these hurdles? And for me, it's I'm taking time to figure out what I wanted to do was really important. During that year off, I worked and I saved up money, and then I took a trip to Europe and I like traveled around. I rode trains, I stayed in hostels, I did a work exchange on a farm. I really took some time for myself to say, okay, like what do I want to do and what is important to me in my life? And after spending some time doing that, what I settled on was I want to do the most interesting research work. I want to do the cutting edge, the newest, the hardest stuff. And when I decided on that, getting a PhD is really a requirement for doing that work yourself. And so that's really what motivated me. But yeah, there were points where I wasn't sure, a few years, even length of time, where I was like, I don't know, do I want to go to grad school? Do I want to just get a job in industry and make some money? So I'm glad I did what I did, but it wasn't always obvious what I should do.
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I think, you know, everyone else has spoken on so many topics that I can resonate with for sure. I think one that impacted me when I was younger that I had to get over, that was pretty tough and struggle-wise, was that I had a lot of really negative connotations around math. I had a really bad math teacher in 7th grade, and I had always loved math up until that point. And I was really struggling in this class, and she was just really harsh and mean about it. And so it gave me a really bad association with math. And so even though I loved the science classes and I did well in them, I never could get into the math part. And I think it really impacted my perceptions around science. And it wasn't until I got to college that I actually kind of got over that. You know, I still obviously took classes and did okay and stuff, but I kind of got over it when I realized, like, no, I love the chemistry, I love the applied math, and I need to learn this, you know, calculus and multivariable calculus so I can do quantum mechanics. And I really want to understand quantum mechanics, so I'm going to do it. And I did really well and made it kind of over that. And so I think that's something that I think was a really wonderful lesson, because it, you know, just because you struggled in something before doesn't mean you always have to struggle through it. And there's other routes. And sometimes you just have to accept that maybe that was a rough patch, but that's okay. I think in the current role that I'm in and what I'm doing, it's really complicated starting a company, especially a company that's trying to commercialize deep tech and deep science that's never been commercialized before. And it's wonderful and it's really fun sometimes, and other times it's like, this is insane and impossible. And so, you know, it's kind of moving back and forth between that and finding some balance and ways to get through that. And, you know, having Jill and the Activate community certainly helps, because I'm with a bunch of other people who are all doing the same thing. And so you kind of find your people that you can relate and sort of confide in. And so I think that's also really important. The social aspects of science are wonderful too.
Can I jump in on
I quickly, go ahead, Jill.
I want to jump in on the struggle question too, because I didn't mention it in my intro, but yeah, I struggled too along the way, in that, you know, I changed fields from environmental science to molecular and cell biology. And my classmates in grad school like had been doing this since, you know, they were don't know, seemed like went since they were 4, and been working in labs the whole time. And like I was really coming into it pretty new and without all of the background coursework. And so, yeah, there were like tears before exams, and I didn't really unpack my boxes until I passed my qualifying exam. And, you know, it was really, really rough for a while. But I did persevere. And I, you know, the confidence grew after that. And I think what that did was that it gave me the confidence to switch fields or jobs, like, you know, all through my career. You know, I switched from like biochemistry and cell biology to, you know, biophysics in my postdoc and doing structural biology. And that there was a lot to learn there. And then, you know, starting a company, of course, there was a lot to learn there. And now in my new role, there's more to learn. So yeah, the struggles often lead to, you know, the biggest gains in confidence, I think, too. So go ahead, Kanapriya, sorry to cut you off.
Yeah, I wanted to follow on yours and Micah's and Aaron's train of thought. So I actually had very good math and science teachers when I was in school, and I think perhaps that's what got me into you know, developing an interest in that. And then when I was an undergraduate, first couple of years didn't have very good teachers, but I did join this chemistry lab, experimental chemistry lab, where my supervisor was really good, and I saw how excited he was about research and materials discovery. And he'd tell you, you know, if you don't go back to the cafeteria and tell everybody about what you did today and how impactful your research is, you're not excited enough. So I used to do that, and so I can't emphasize more on the importance of getting good mentors. So, you know, there might be a certain subject that you really like, say in the university or in grad school that you want to do. But I would also say that you should weigh your options and choices also based on, you know, the kind of mentors you're going to get in that particular subject. So say you go to grad school and you want to pick on your line of research, I think you should also do research on how good the professor is going to be, or your supervisor is going to be, in mentoring you and pushing you when, you know, you're at a low, your research is not working out and you want to be pushed, you know, someone who can help you with that. So that's very important. I wish somebody had told that to me when I was young. But
and to be clear, the way you get that information is by talking to people that work for that person. It's hard to just Google and like find like actual good quality information on what someone is like to work for. You've got to talk to their grad students, the researchers that are working for them. Really important.
Thank you for sharing some of your career challenges. I think it's so important for students to know that, like, maybe they don't have to have it all figured out right now, or they can have a couple career changes and it's not the end of the world. And I know, like, I've been through some of that. It's like, oh, what am I going to study? So I wanted to ask you if you, well, we have another question in chat, a follow-up. Do any of you wish you did anything differently in your career path, or what are some of the best decisions that you've made so far that you don't regret at all? We can go, does anyone have like an answer off the top of their head? We can go with Aaron, Jill, KP, and then Micah.
Yeah, I actually have one very front of mind, and I think it was to be far more patient with myself. You know, in switching career paths and moving between different fields, I had this high expectation, which I think high expectations are really good, right? It's good to set the bar high for yourself and try to overachieve, or, you know, hit high goals. But I think, you know, kind of like what Jill was saying, you know, I went into material science from food science, having worked in the industry for 3 years, and I kind of went in expecting, yeah, I'm going to be able to pick all of it up super fast and I'll just be great. And, you know, no, almost everyone else in my program was fresh out of material science undergrad programs. No doubt they were going to have more experience in this area. I was a chemist and food scientist. And so I think just being patient and saying, no, we're just going to work hard and get through it. And I'll learn as much as I can for now, and then get a little rest and get back at it tomorrow. And so I think that that's really important. So that for me sticks out.
That was my experience as well, because I went from being a material scientist to a computational condensed matter physicist, and then now I do a lot of applied math. And so I was very critical of myself when I was not as good as the other people who've been doing what they're doing for so longer than me. And so it's important to have patience with yourself, and when you need help, you go ask for help. Not the first minute you need help, but the other people who have more experience in the field, after you've struggled with a problem for a bit, yeah, it's good to go ask for help. There's no shame in it.
I think mine is I wish I would have learned to code a bit more. Just a little more, yeah, like command line coding would have been what a great skill. I mean, I can do it. I definitely like ran instruments at the at the advanced light source, but I had really like it never felt comfortable to me. So I think that would have been great. And to analyze some big data sets, I would have liked to have learned how to code. But on the question of like, what do you, I don't know how you asked about like, what did you do well or something like that? Like for me, all the time I spent meeting people and making connections with people, I feel like was the best time that I spent. And that was, helping people and giving my time to them and that sort of thing. And it was really hard to do I feel like in grad school and postdoc, because like my advisors discouraged that type of work because they wanted me in the lab, like doing, experiments 24/7. And so like, I always felt a little guilty whenever I was doing that kind of work, but I think that had the biggest payoff in my career. It's just like having this big supportive network was really important to make career changes and, make a difference really. So yeah, people, I think we don't talk about people enough in science, and people are really what makes science go around and do the science and make science successful. And so, yeah, all those connections have been super important in my career.
Yeah, so I'll highlight a few things. One is that I'm really glad that I took the time off that I did. And it was a year in undergrad and then 2 years after undergrad that I spent doing research before I decided to go to grad school. And even though that meant I was 3 years older than most of the people in my position, it meant that I had 3 more years of experience. So that time was not wasted. I was still doing research. And when I came into grad school, I felt way more confident. I felt like I hit the ground running compared to a lot of my peers, because I had been spending 2 years just doing research where a lot of them were coming fresh out of undergrad. They're still trying to figure things out. And maybe they only got a year or so of research experience while they were there. So that put me way ahead of the curve in a lot of ways. And I'm really, really glad that I did that. It was a lot easier to get started in grad school with that experience. The other thing I want to highlight is, and to stress Jill's point, we need a lot of different people in science, and we need different skill sets. It's not all just a bunch of math wizards. And in fact, it's really important that we get people that aren't math wizards. And so I'm not one of those people. I have a very mediocre math background compared to a lot of scientists. And so if I compare myself in like deriving these equations and doing calculus, I will have a very hard time compared to my colleagues. However, I am much better at other things, programming specifically, writing code. We spend a lot of our time writing code, it turns out. And you need a lot of software to do scientific experiments and to make things. And so developing those skills was really good for my grad school work. Like knowing how to code before coming to grad school and being really proficient at it made my life a lot easier going through the process, where maybe the math was a little bit harder. And I asked for help to kind of Priya's point, rely on the people that are good at that stuff and they'll help you with that. And then I'll focus on the things that I'm good at and do science that way.
If I can hop in, one other thing I wanted to share, and I really appreciate that point, Micah, about we need a lot of people from all over the place. I'm a first-gen college student, and I often had the experience of being the only person of color in my classrooms. And also many times being the only person with other kinds of experiences. So I was a food scientist, but I was a chemist. And that actually was a huge benefit to me because I had a totally different viewpoint and worldview and set of skills than a lot of my peers in that food science community. And when I came to material science, having been a chemist, having had time working in industry, that was a huge benefit. It gave me a different context, a different set of tools, a different way of thinking. And many of the advances that we find really exciting and that, we see Nobel Prizes for and things like that come from this interdisciplinary science. And I think a lot of the really challenging problems that we have to face as a world are going to come from these interdisciplinary approaches. And so we need new ideas and interesting ideas. And a great way to do that is bringing them from all over the place and putting them all together and making new puzzles, right? So definitely keep that up and think about that as you go forward in your careers.
Thank you for that. Before we move on, I think it has to be addressed. Micah, what is the name of your cat? Because Myra and I have been laughing at you wrangling your cat all call.
Yeah, this is just my life. Her name is Mura, M-U-R-A, and it's actually a reference to my dissertation. A lot of scientists love to name their pets after like dead scientists or dead physicists or whatever. And I didn't want to be a total cliche, so I pulled a obscure imaging methodology out of my dissertation called modified uniformly redundant array, and that's Mura.
I love
That's that. Not nerdy at all.
That's awesome. Okay, so I'd like to ask something from the Q&A box from Kamaya. So I know Aaron's talked about his passion for like food and then how that led to food science. So specifically for everyone else, how did your hobbies relate to your professions today? So I'm actually going to go Aaron last on this one because he's already talked about it. So we'll start with Jill and then KP and then Micah and then Aaron again.
So I'm actually going to send it to someone else because they just started like weed whacking behind me. It's really loud. So if someone else can go, I'll go in a minute.
I can go. I don't want to stereotype it, but growing up in India, I didn't really have a lot of hobbies. My dad used to, I think when I was 11 or 12, my dad would, at the weekends, I'd go with him to his office so that I could use the computer and write code in BASIC and debug it. So, that's not, maybe that was a hobby. I have no idea. But when I went to undergraduate, from then onward, I actually started running distance, and that sort of gave me some time to, de-stress. A lot of the time I would just run and I would yell if things were not working out. And I continued running all through grad school and postdoc. So it wasn't really related to my profession, but it was just doing endurance training, running and cycling just was a way for me to de-stress myself and not get super depressed, and also have short-term goals. So I ran races that gave me a short-term goal in case my, your research is sort of a long-term goal. So it also gave me a sense of achievement.
Micah, do you just want to go next?
Yeah, that's I grew up, like I said, kind of taking stuff apart, and I've always been interested in how things work. I've been writing code since I was younger. And so that kind of got me into the engineering and science space. Nuclear is something I just kind of stumbled into by accident. I took a seminar and it seemed really cool. And so I switched into it from electrical engineering and computer science. But that's really the main overlap. Otherwise, in terms of hobbies, I like to do other stuff. I run like Kanupriya, and I'll be running in the San Francisco Marathon in 2 days. So that's my big race coming up. I used to bowl a lot. I was pretty good at bowling and bowled in a few bowling leagues. I picked up kiteboarding since I've been back here in Alameda, since I can just go down the street and do that. And that's where you have the big kite like 100 feet up in the air and you're on the board and it's pulling you with the wire. So has nothing to do with nuclear stuff, but I think it is important to be well balanced and to like get some exercise, to do things that are outside of your space. In part, again, what Kanupriya said about like having goals and finding fulfillment, achieving things in other parts, because sometimes science, you're gonna not have a lot of luck with whatever you're working on. So you can't put all of your eggs in that basket to feel successful.
Yeah, so I guess my hobbies, I think, focus around nature, like hiking and skiing and those sorts of things. I love biology. Gosh, I just wherever I can see like the wonder of biology, I think is my biggest thing, and that leads to travel. You know, going to different places and seeing like the wonders of the world and that sort of stuff. And I see biology wherever I go. So, yeah, I think that's my hobby. But yes, I'm gonna second. It's so important to have a balanced life and have things that you do outside of a lab that's fun and help you decompress and connect with other people.
Yeah, I already talked a little bit about food, and I think food is still the muse. Like food's, biology is incredibly complicated, and food, comes out of biology most of the time, and it's thermodynamics and physics and heat transfer and all these cool things. But a sort of different one that actually I share with Micah is that I loved video games growing up and played a lot of video games, and I think it definitely influenced. I loved RPGs, and so I think that got me into thinking about optimization and thinking about, how do I kind of tweak the numbers and, get an edge and beat my friends at Pokemon and all kind of stuff like that. And the other one I think actually that really is important is I played all the little 3D games, right? So Mario, and that sort of 3D spatial thinking is really important in a lot of branches of science, and especially in chemistry and biology. You have 3D shapes and structures, right? And they're moving and they're dynamic and they're interacting with things and colliding. And that's what you're doing when you're playing games. You're trying to project and sort of think about those kinds of things. And so I think that actually really helped in my career, especially when I got to OChem and it was all like, well, we're going to reface and side face and all of that. So, you're not wasting your time necessarily.
Awesome. I love all of these answers, and I really want to talk more, but we are coming short on time. So as our closing question, if everyone could just provide like a 30-second answer, we wanted to ask you what your best piece of advice a mentor has given you, or one piece of advice that you want to pass on to all the students here who are aspiring to have a career in STEM. Because Kanupriya kind of already answered this, would you like to go first? And then we'll go Jill, Erin, and then finish off with Micah.
Yeah, so as I said before, make sure you get very good mentors who are going to lead the way for you, who you can discuss, a lot of problems with them, and they'll make sure that, when you're at a point of giving up, you will not give up. Also, if you fail in one path, there's always another path that's going to open up. So, that's not considered a failure.
I forgot the order, so I'm just gonna go. I would just say work with great people, 100%. That's the formula. That's all. Thanks everyone. This has been really fun.
Yeah, I think embrace your curiosity and follow it, because if you're curious, you can find all sorts of interesting things to keep you motivated and keep you going.
Yeah, I'll say, and I think this always ends up being my advice at these sorts of events is to take care of yourself and follow your own path. You will get a lot of external pressure to do things certain ways, and to go through the scientific track or the academic track in certain ways. And based on my experience, I think that it's kind of rigid, and you really need to do what's right for you in your own situation, which is going to be different for everyone. So just make sure to take care of yourself. Science is a noble endeavor, and sometimes that leads us to sacrificing our own personal lives in the pursuit of it. And it's really important that you take care of yourself so that you can do it sustainably longer term.
All right, so with that, I think we're finished with today's career talk. So I'd like to first thank all the panelists for coming. Thank you so much. This was amazing. And also thank you to the audience who have been coming to these. Amazing. So yeah, Have a great day, everyone. Thanks for coming, and we'll see you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.